Call came on a Tuesday morning while I was still in my car in the parking garage at work. My phone buzzed against the center console, my uncle's name on the screen. I almost didn't pick up. We hadn't spoken in almost 2 years, not since my grandmother's funeral, when he'd made a comment under his breath that I was too busy playing hero to be a real part of this family. I'd let it go. I was good at letting things go. I answered anyway. "Your father filed the petition," he said. No hello. No, how are you? Just that. "The house goes to probate next month if you don't show up." I sat in that parking garage for a long time after he hung up. The engine was still running. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed and flickered like they always do on level 3. I watched a woman push a stroller past the elevator bank and thought about my grandmother's kitchen. The smell of her coffee, the particular creak of the third floorboard near the pantry, the way she used to hum while she did the dishes. A sound I hadn't heard in almost 5 years. The house was hers. It was supposed to come to me. She had told me so herself, sitting at that same kitchen table, 3 months before she passed. She pressed my hand between both of hers and said, "Ivy, this house is yours. You're the one who came back. My name is Ivy Callahan." I was 31 years old, a flight paramedic for an air medical transport program in the Pacific Northwest, and I had not spoken to my father or my older brother in close to 18 months. Not because I wanted it that way, because they had made it that way, one small cruelty at a time, until I finally stopped reaching. And now my father was trying to take my grandmother's house. I grew up in that house in rural Eastern Oregon, a 2-story farmhouse outside a town so small the gas station doubled as the post office. My grandmother raised me from the time I was 7, after my mother left, and my father made it clear that a daughter was not what he'd had in mind for his life. He had my brother. That was enough. My brother was 4 years older than me and had inherited my father's talent for making people feel like an inconvenience. He was charming when he wanted to be. At family gatherings, holidays, in front of people who didn't know better. He was warm, funny, the kind of man who clapped you on the shoulder and made you feel seen. But behind closed doors, with just the two of us, he had a way of reminding me of my place. "You're not actually one of us," he told me once when I was maybe 16. We were standing in the driveway of my grandmother's house. He'd driven out from the city to visit and had somehow ended up in an argument with her over money. He was always in an argument with someone over money. And I had taken her side. He looked at me the way you look at something you've stepped in. "You know that, right? You're a charity case." Always have been. I didn't say anything. I went inside and helped my grandmother clear the table. She never asked me what he'd said. She just handed me a dish towel and said, "Ivy, some people carry their smallness like it's something to be proud of. Don't let it become yours." I never forgot that. After I moved out at 18, I worked 2 jobs to put myself through EMT certification, then paramedic school, then the additional training for flight operations. It took years. I lived in small apartments, drove cars that needed more forgiveness than maintenance, and sent my grandmother a card every birthday and every Christmas without fail. I visited when I could, which was not as often as I wanted. The schedule of flight medicine does not bend easily for personal life. My father and brother visited less. They had reasons. There were always reasons. When my grandmother got sick, I was the one who rearranged my shifts. I drove the 4.5 hours from Portland on my days off. I sat with her through appointments and through the bad nights. I learned which medications made her nauseous and which television programs she could tolerate, and that she preferred her tea with just a half spoon of sugar, not a full one. My father came to see her twice in her final year. My brother came once. They were polite about it, stiff, the way people are polite when they want credit for showing up without actually being present. After she passed, there was no formal reading of the will. There didn't need to be. She'd been clear with everyone. The house was mine. She'd told her pastor. She'd told her neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Abernathy, who had lived across the road for 40 years. She had even written the letter, in her own handwriting, stating her wishes. But she had never updated the deed. That was the gap my father found. That was the door he walked through. The probate hearing was scheduled for a Thursday. I requested the time off, drove down the night before, and stayed at Mrs. Abernathy's house because I could not bring myself to stay in my grandmother's house while it was in dispute. It felt wrong, like standing in a room where someone had rearranged everything 2 inches to the left. Familiar and not. Mrs. Abernathy made me chamomile tea and let me sit in her kitchen without asking me to explain everything. She was 81 years old and had sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense. "Your father called me," she told me. I set down my mug. When last week? Wanted to know if your grandmother had said anything to me about the house. She paused. I told him exactly what she said. He didn't like it. What did he say? She looked at me over the rim of her own mug. He said that whatever she might have told people, a daughter who was never around doesn't have much of a claim. She reached over and patted my hand. I told him that was an interesting thing to say about a woman who drove 4 hours every 2 weeks to take her grandmother to chemotherapy. I didn't sleep well that night. The county courthouse was small, the kind of building that doubles as a community center on weekends. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, a water stain on the ceiling tiles above the second row of seats. I arrived early and sat in the hallway outside the hearing room, still in my jacket, watching people come and go. My father arrived with my brother and an attorney I didn't recognize, a man in his late 40s with the careful posture of someone who charges by the hour and knows it. They walked past me without stopping. My father looked at me the way he always had, like I was a problem he hadn't solved yet. My brother paused. Just for a moment, and he said, loud enough for the hallway to hear, "You really drove all the way down here? For what? You haven't been part of this family in years." I looked at him. I didn't say anything. I had learned over the course of my entire life that saying something was rarely worth the energy it cost me. A woman sitting 2 chairs down from me looked over. I didn't know her. She looked away. I went into the hearing room and sat down. The hearing officer was a man named Judge Caldwell, not a dramatic figure, not the kind of judge you'd see on television. He was a compact man in his early 60s with reading glasses and a cardigan under his robe that was visible at the collar. He looked like someone who coached a youth soccer team on weekends and meant it. My father's attorney opened. He was smooth, organized, methodical, practiced in the way of someone who knows which arguments land and which ones don't. He laid out the case clearly. The deed named my father as heir by default. There was no formal amendment on record, and whatever verbal agreements may have existed were not legally binding instruments. He was not unkind about it. He was just matter of fact, and matter of fact has its own particular cruelty. I had not hired an attorney. I couldn't afford one, not on short notice, not for something that had dropped into my life 6 days before the hearing. I had filed a response myself, attached my grandmother's handwritten letter, gathered the documentation I had, her medical records showing my involvement, text messages, receipts from the pharmacy runs, the carbon copy of a check she had written to me with "house" written in the memo line. When it was my turn, I stood up and I presented what I had. I was not polished. I was not practiced. But I had spent years working in situations where the margin for error was measured in seconds. And I knew how to stay calm when calm was the only useful thing I had. I laid the documents on the table. I spoke clearly. I did not look at my father or my brother. Judge Caldwell listened without interrupting. He looked at the handwritten letter for a long time. He picked it up, actually, and read it again. Then he looked up at my father's attorney. "Counsel," he said, "can you tell me the last time your client visited his mother in the 12 months before her death?" The attorney paused. It was brief, a professional pause, not a surprised one. But it was there. "I'd have to review the record," he said. "The record the respondent provided," Judge Caldwell said, "includes pharmacy receipts, medical transport logs, and signed caregiver documentation going back 22 months. All in the respondent's name." He set down his glasses. "Does your client have documentation of comparable involvement during that period?" Another pause. Longer. I did not turn around. I kept my eyes on the table. Behind me, I heard my brother shift in his seat. The hearing recessed for 20 minutes. I sat in the hallway again, on the same bench, and drank from a water bottle I'd brought from Mrs. Abernathy's house. A courthouse aide walked by and gave me a small nod, the kind people give when they've seen something and don't quite know what to do with it. My father came out of the hearing room. I didn't look up. He stood there for a moment. I could feel it. "You didn't have to make this into a whole production," he said. I looked up at him. He was 72 years old, and he looked it. Not diminished exactly, but smaller than he'd been in my memory, like something that takes up less space than it used to. "I didn't make it into anything," I said. "You filed the petition." He made a sound, something halfway between a scoff and an exhale. "She would have wanted the house to stay in the family." "I am the family," I said. I was the one who showed up. He didn't have an answer for that. He went back inside. When the hearing resumed, Judge Caldwell did something I hadn't expected. He asked to hear from Mrs. Abernathy. She had come with me. I hadn't asked her to. She had simply appeared at the courthouse that morning in her good coat and told me she had a few things to say. She said them. She was methodical and precise and entirely without drama. She described every visit she had witnessed over the course of 4 years. She described the night I had called her from Portland at 11 p.m. because my grandmother had fallen and I needed someone to go check on her until I could drive down. She described watching me fix the gutters on a visit in October 2 years ago because my grandmother had mentioned they were sagging and I had just done it, without being asked, before I drove back to Portland. My father's attorney attempted a cross-examination. He was respectful. Mrs. Betmis Abernathy was 81 years old and sharp as a tack, and anyone with sense is careful around that combination. He asked if she could verify that my grandmother's verbal statements had been made with full cognitive clarity. Mrs. Abernathy looked at him for a moment. "She beat me at Scrabble 3 weeks before she died," she said. "I believe that qualifies." There was a sound from somewhere in the room. I think it might have been the aide trying not to laugh. Judge Caldwell ruled that afternoon. He did not give me the house outright. Probate doesn't work that way, and I hadn't expected it to. What he did was issue a finding that the documentary evidence strongly supported my grandmother's stated intent and that the estate should be administered accordingly. He recommended a formal mediation process with that finding as the baseline. In practical terms, my father's petition was not going to succeed. My brother found me outside the courthouse by my car. I had my keys in my hand. I was ready to get in and drive and not think about any of it for at least an hour. "Ivy," he said. I turned around. He looked different. Not soft, exactly. My brother is not a soft person, but something in his face had shifted. He had the look of someone who had been watching themselves from the outside for the first time and did not entirely like what they saw. "I didn't know," he said. "About the chemotherapy." "About any of that." I looked at him for a moment. "You could have known. You could have called her." He didn't say anything to that. "You could have called me," I said. And then, because I was tired and I had a 4.5-hour drive ahead of me, and I did not have anything left to perform for anyone, "She loved you. She asked about you every single time I came down. I want you to know that." He looked away. His jaw was tight. I could see him working against something. "I don't know how to do this," he said. It came out quiet, like something that had been sitting in a place he didn't look very often. "Do what?" I don't know. Be better at this." I was quiet for a minute. A car pulled out of the lot behind us. The wind came off the hills the way it always does in eastern Oregon in the fall, cold and clean and carrying the smell of dry grass. "I don't know either," I said, "but it starts with showing up." I got in my car. I drove north. 3 weeks later, my brother called. I was on a rest break between shifts, sitting in the crew lounge with a bad cup of coffee and a crossword puzzle I was losing to on principle. His name on my screen was strange enough that I stared at it for a second before answering. He didn't ask about the house. He asked how I was. He asked what my schedule looked like around Thanksgiving. It was a small thing. The smallest thing, really. The kind of beginning that doesn't look like much from the outside. I told him I might be able to get Thursday off if I traded a shift. I told him I'd let him know. After I hung up, I sat with my bad coffee and my half-finished crossword and thought about my grandmother's kitchen. The hum, the floorboard, the particular way the light came through the window over the sink in the late afternoon. How she used to say that some things take a long time to grow back, but that doesn't mean they won't. I thought she would have liked to know that I was still trying. I thought she probably already did. I've thought a lot about what my grandmother used to say, that some people carry their smallness like it's something to be proud of. I didn't fully understand that when I was 16, standing in the driveway while my brother looked at me like I was something he'd stepped in. I understood it better standing outside that courthouse, keys in my hand, watching him try to find words for the first time in his life. What I know now is this: the way things turn out is rarely random. It looks random from the outside. It looks like luck, or timing, or who happened to walk into a courtroom on a Thursday afternoon. But it isn't. It's the accumulation of choices so small they barely felt like choices at the time. The decision to answer the phone, to drive 4.5 hours on a day off, to fix the gutters without being asked. None of those things felt significant when I did them. I was just doing what needed doing, but they added up. They always add up. My father made choices too. So did my brother. And their choices added up just the same way, in the opposite direction. Not because the universe was keeping score, not because the universe was keeping score, not because of anything abstract or cosmic, just because that's how human beings work. We become what we repeatedly do. We get back, eventually, something close to what we put in. My father put in absence. He got back a courtroom where a judge held up a stack of pharmacy receipts and asked him a question he couldn't answer. I don't say that with satisfaction. I want to be honest about that. There's a version of this story where I feel triumphant standing in that parking lot, and it's a dishonest version. What I actually felt was tired and a little sad, because my grandmother deserved a son who showed up. My brother deserved a father who modeled something better than contempt. And I deserved a family that didn't require a legal proceeding to acknowledge what was plainly true. The intelligence in this, if there is any, wasn't anything dramatic. It was just the willingness to keep records. Not literally, though. That helped. But internally. To know what I had actually done and to be able to say it clearly, without apology, without embellishment. That kind of clarity takes practice. It requires that you not let other people's version of you become the version you believe. My father had called me absent for so long that I think he'd come to believe it. My brother had called me peripheral for so long that he'd stopped questioning it. The work I did, quietly, over years, was not just for my grandmother. It was for my own sense of what was real. And maybe that's what I'd want anyone to take from this. Not a lesson about winning or about being right. Just this: the truth of what you do doesn't disappear because no one acknowledges it. It stays in the record. It stays in the people who witnessed it. Mrs. Abernathy remembered. Judge Caldwell could read. My grandmother knew. Show up. Do the quiet work. Let it accumulate. Not because someone is watching. Because you are.